All right, I think we're going. Welcome back to another one of these things where we're just kind of chatting about whatever comes to mind. I realize I said chatting instead of talking this time, which I guess aligns with what this category or playlist is called, but I usually say talking. A little weird for me. Anyway, hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. And it is indeed Tuesday. I say it every week, but the only reason I know that is because I had to write a poem today. And every time I say that, it always sounds like it's a chore or something, but I just still rather enjoy it. Still an enjoyable part of a Tuesday evening activity. But yeah, hope yours is going great. Haiku or no. And yeah, my day was all right, I suppose, outside of just a lot of research, honestly. Again, 2 days in a row of just a lot of research. Yesterday was probably what I'm actually going to talk about here today, so I'll leave that. But today was mostly just looking at what kind of grant options are available to see if anything would like to fund a project, essentially, or help fund some aspect of a project. So fair amount of stuff out there. If you are doing work in a science, STEM, or like educational like area, there are the National Science Foundation does have a sort of segment, a chunk of money off to the side for supporting small businesses and ventures that they're doing for really just anything. Like, as long as you're doing something interesting that is considered sort of risky from a technology perspective, like there's not a lot of people doing it, or the people who are doing it aren't doing it very well, or you're doing it for a whole new sector or something like that, then they strongly encourage pitching your project, and if you get past that, writing a proposal. And that sounds kind of like a lot to do. If you're okay at writing in general, like you're a fairly good communicator, the pitch is probably fairly straightforward. You're describing what your what intellectual merit you have, the broader impact of your project, a little bit about your team, and how you think you'll make this thing successful. And that's really about it. Beyond that, the proposal is really just more in-depth than that. If you're good at organizing plans, ideas, know how you would budget the spending for just actually getting money and making this thing a reality, because they're gonna want you to succeed. So that's, as long as you know kind of what you're doing and what you wanna do. Like, I was surprised at how available an option like that was, provided you're a U.S. citizen. And there's a bunch of other things too that I had looked into that like do a fair bit of stuff, but you have to be like a certain kind of company or be doing a certain kind of work. Like, one of them, you'd have to be either a museum or a library or a nonprofit that works with one of those organizations or is affiliated with one of those organizations. And the other was more like humanities driven, which I could technically spin what I want to do as humanities driven, but it really isn't. It'd be a really hard spin. So we'll see where the options I landed with take me and see how that goes. Flexing a bit of a story building, writing muscle, I guess, and a bit of planning and organization. That I do have a bit of experience in, like professional experience in. So we'll see kind of how that goes. But topic for today, kind of a little bit of preview there. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about like grant stuff after I actually write something, because I feel like right now it's just like what's available out there, and like how I write for a grant would very largely depend on what I'm writing the grant for or which organization I'm applying for a grant with. So I might share that at some point, just after I actually choose a thing, and then like maybe have like a first draft and critique it or something. That might be kind of neat. But things yesterday, I forget what the core of what I was looking into yesterday was. It might have been business law firms. Just to see if there's anybody out there that I'd like to establish a relationship with, and asking a few communities that I'm a part of if they have any recommendations. But beyond that, was doing research on open source licensing, which that's going to sound really boring out of the gate, and it kind of is. Like, I can't really get out of this feeling of the things that I'm researching are things that I would rather not be researching, but I have to understand them going into having a business and protecting myself and making sure I'm doing all the right things as I'm sort of going through all this stuff. It's just a lot of, I was kind of hoping that this month I'd be like actually doing some work, but it's probably just going to be a administrative kind of month, I guess. Administrative and design. So as long as I'm doing the design stuff, I'll be happy, but I can't wait to actually start working on some things. But one of the things that was probably kind of interesting and relevant to a lot of people if you're working on any kind of code project, which I very much be working on. If you do want to make that open source, allow other people to use it, you do have to do something to allow that. Otherwise, the default state for code that doesn't have a license associated to it is that you retain exclusive rights to it, which is probably the reverse of what people would think. It's like you're afraid of putting ideas out into the greater internet space. You're putting something out there and you're like, well, someone's going to take this and I have no way to really prove it's mine. If you have source code and you use a platform like GitHub, they're storing it for you and they can prove that it's yours. And if you had it there at a certain date or time, or your repository has changes that go back to a certain date, then they could almost certainly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, be like, yes, this one existed first. So I guess that space, just having that space and that log that's in a public arena, makes it a little bit more possible. But not having a license on your repository does really restrict how people can use it. People won't want to use it just because in case you didn't make a mistake and you didn't include a license in there because it's copywritten, it belongs to you and nobody can use it. In case that was your intent, even without it, no one will want to touch it because you can go after them legally, which is people don't really want to do. Before getting into any of this stuff too, none of this constitutes legal advice. Clearly, this is just me having done a bit of research on a topic that I thought was a little bit more straightforward than I had anticipated. So as I started going into this, I was like, this is interesting stuff. And there were some decent breakdowns of what types of licenses were out there, and figured I'd share the summaries. Again, all of this is completely up to what you want to do. And if you do work with other legal folks, then letting them know what you're going to do, so that everyone is kind of hunky-dory. But these kinds of things definitely aren't a one-size-fits-all type solution. But if you are hosting on GitHub, one of the things that it does ask you when creating a repository is what kind of license you would want to use. And there's a nice little guide for like understanding the summaries of each of these licenses, what their kind of high points are, and what differentiates them from other licenses. And since they do want to, empower, encourage an open source community, they're just defaults for showing like what licenses are available are generally all for ensuring other people can access and contribute to the code that you put out there. Most of these are really just enough legalese to allow a user to help you and make contributions. The other part of that is that other people can take it and use it depending on what the license you choose allows. So just going off of what those are, we can kind of break this down. Like this would honestly make a decent edited video if I could just like pop up little like words and text and things. Maybe I'll do that at some point. Like I really do need to just like jump into an editing software, not just do this kind of stuff. Maybe I'll revisit this one. This one might actually be decent for actually having some text on screen or something more than just me talking. But anyway, we have gone over not having one. That basically just locks that code's rights to you. Any of the text here and how it runs, it is all yours. Any output from this repository is yours, and any legal entity that's observing that would be like, okay, there's nothing they're saying that nobody else can use it. You basically leave it alone. So different than what I would have anticipated if it were just text existing on the internet. It'd be like, okay, I guess there's really no real knowing whose it was to begin with, but there you have it. You retain rights to your thing if you don't expressly say that you want other people to use it. Beyond that point, the probably most permissive, I guess, would be, and this isn't really a license, but if you don't care, then you can put something in the public domain, which would be what I thought not including a license would do, but it doesn't, because it can be traced back to you. You retain the rights to it, the exclusive rights to the code that you wrote. If you don't want that, and what you actually want is to not have a license, like explicitly, one that's saying I don't own this and people can use this, then you want something called the unlicensed, which makes it available in the public domain, that anybody can use it for whatever they want, and there are no conditions. The only thing that it does do is make sure that you, as the person who has a license associated to the work, is not liable for anything that the code does or what anybody else does with it. Or if it doesn't work, then doesn't work as somebody thinks it should, that you don't get in trouble for it. But you can use it for whatever you want then. If you do care a little bit, and like you want people to generally know that you have worked on something, the MIT license is what people are generally using these days. It's anybody can use this, or use your code, use the software that you've built. They can use it commercially, they can modify it, they can distribute it, but they have to say that they're using your thing. Basically just saying that this was initially written by this person, or it's a derivative work of this thing. It also includes those liability and warranty things that we discussed from the unlicensed as well. So basically, people can use it however they want, and that's about that. The other one, which is fairly similar, but supposedly has a bit of verbiage in it for protecting against like patent trolls and the like, is the Apache v2 license, or Apache 2.0 license, which still allows for commercial use and redistribution, and you can modify it however you want. You just have to state the changes that you made to that code, and you have to say that that is a derivative work, or it is using something made by the original author, you, the original license holder. The other one that you might come across or be considering is what would be considered a copyleft license. That's not the name of it, that's just a term. And that's the GNU GPL v3 license. What this does is people can still use this code. They can use it commercially. And they do have to say that you're using something that is either is in its entirety or is a derivative of something that you created. But that derivative work, or work that is using the library that you made available with the GPL v3 license, also has to use that GPL v3 license. What's interesting about this is that there is a clause that says that the source for the code for that derivative work, or work that just uses this, has to be open source. You have to make that code available to people who want to see it. That's why they consider this license a viral one, that anything that wants to use this as a part of other derivative work based off of work that has this license, has to have the GPL v3 license, which means that it has to be open source. You can't create a derivative work and then close it off and package that and keep it a secret, essentially. You have to make that available for people who want to use it, which is great for spreading open source. But the license does, like, if you want other people to use it, like if the point of you writing this code is for other people to use it and you get some kind of kickback or financial gain from having other companies or groups use it, then it gets hard for corporations that don't have open source code to use that. They are going to avoid what you're creating, because they don't want to inherit the requirements for their code to also have that GPL v3 license and thus require their code to be open source. They will look for other license types or other work that's similar but is under a different license, something like the Apache v2 or the MIT license, or in public domain. But those were the three that I thought were kind of neat. There is one more that was kind of interesting, a GPL v3, which is sort of intended for things that aren't going to be like just a library that people have to run, or like something on their desktop, but something that runs on a server, like a website or an API, that users, anybody who uses this application has rights to your source code. So not just other people, like it's not just other people who are writing code or are using your work as a derivative work. It's just people who consume this thing also have the rights to that code, which is fairly interesting. Basically, it's kind of, it kind of avoids, like, even though that's not a really good example. I won't even say that, but it's essentially like keeping application black boxes, like, not that way for consumers. Like, there might be other corporations that you have like business to business relationships with that use code and derive their code from that, and they make that available to other business partners, but they would never make that available to their consumer. And this one kind of requires it, that if somebody does interact with this over the internet per se, they would be able to get to that open source code as well. So that's an interesting, even more beyond that. There is a lesser GPL, the LGPL v3, which is taking a step back, that says if you have this library that you want to make available, you can effectively make that that open source piece not be viral to the point of the entire thing that somebody is incorporating your library into, but just to the pieces that the library interacts with. So if you were working with like one service within this monolithic application, that it would just impact the services that the library is used with, not say the website that also runs with that service. So you would have to open source the service code that uses that library, but not the website that depends on that service, essentially. So things out there for people to look into. And that was probably all quite boring, honestly, and it took a lot longer than I anticipated to get through it. But maybe if I name this thing well enough, it will actually help somebody out. I'll put some links in the description too for just text-based resources that I thought were pretty nice. The Choose a License site that GitHub links to is pretty great. Thought that was really helpful for generally understanding what the licenses are. And there was one blog post that really stood out that was from a lawyer, still not legal advice, going over like, it's not which license you want, it's what are you afraid of happening with your code, and thinking about like using that as a basis for which license to choose, comparing MIT, Apache, and GPL, which, you know, interesting. I ended up getting what I needed out of that kind of research. But again, it's really up to whatever you as a developer want. And if you were working with other people, particularly ones where you have to worry about, particularly with other people where you have to worry about how it impacts the rest of your code base. If you're working for a company that has a legal entity that you work with, then you probably want to talk with them about it. But really what this all boils down to is protections, so that you can't get dinged because your code doesn't do something right, or it ends up causing, say, like a security vulnerability in some downstream product, that if that issue is found in your code that was used, you are not liable for that security vulnerability. That the code doesn't have to work as you say it should. There are protections in those licenses, which is good to have. And then beyond that, it's just, who do you want using it? Who do you want accessing this code and being able to make changes to it? How do you want people to be able to profit from it? And how do you want them to sort of maintain their code as a result? With the GPL license, that's one where if you use it, then you also have to be open source. It just makes the community a bit larger, provided the thing you're building has enough value for people to want to do that. So anyway, thought I'd share that bit of information. Again, probably not super exciting and a bit different than just talking about experience things like yesterday's video was. But in the right hands, this information could probably be helpful. And again, not legal advice, and certainly not anything that should suggest what you're going to be, which license you're going to be doing. Always think about it. Always make sure you're making the decision that makes sense for you and potentially the organization that you work with. Anywho, hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday, and we'll catch you in the next one. See ya.